You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we look beneath the surface of music and technology. I'm your host, Dmitri Vietze. I'm also the founder and CEO of Rock, Paper, Scissors, a music and technology PR firm. All right, today I'm bringing you the Blockchain Peace Summit. So let me start here. Last October at our inaugural Music Tectonics Conference in Los Angeles, we hosted a blockchain cage match refereed by NWA's Arabian Prince with 3 skeptics and 3 enthusiasts facing off in wrestling masks and capes. I came up with this idea for the cage match after attending some music industry conferences in the past couple of years, I'd say, where there were a slew of music blockchain panels. I noticed that while there were entrepreneurs and engineers on stage, there were oftentimes music industry veterans snickering at the back of the room or in the hallway. And I wanted to get into the points of contention instead of seeing the two factions have separate conversations. So though the cage match was fun, it didn't quite turn out the way that I'd hoped. You see, one of our skeptics got sick and we decided to fill the hole with a volunteer from the audience. And in an unplanned turn of events, all of our skeptics ended up being women and all of our enthusiasts ended up being men. I purposely had played up all the theatrics of this session to add some fun to the conference and to push participants to be direct with their positions on blockchain and the music industry. But fueling this debate with a wrestling theme not only led to some playful but heated exchanges. The theme of men yelling over women on a conference panel was not the intended outcome. But that certainly happened at times, and the line between controversy and theatrics rapidly blurred. The energetic response from the audience at the conference made it clear that they were hungry for the dialogue on this topic. So I'm excited to try another spin with today's episode, the Blockchain Peace Summit. To help us unpack the blockchain in music conversation, we have with us today 2 awesome participants from our conference session. Dr. Portia Sabin, president of the Music Business Association and host of the Future of What podcast and radio show. Check it out. And someone with whom I actually ran around in the streets of New York back in high school. Welcome, Portia.
Thanks, Dmitri.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited.
And also with us is Ken Umezaki, co-founder of CEO of Verifi Media. He's also an investor and advisor through his company Digital Daruma, and someone who egged me on when I was first launching my music tech startup, StoryAmp. Welcome, Ken.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Ken, are you in New York? And Portia, are you in Nashville?
I'm in Nashville, yes.
New York City, baby.
Awesome. And I'm in Bloomington, Indiana, as usual. So we got our 3-city conversation. Thank you both for coming on to the podcast and giving us a second chance to tackle the topic of blockchain in the music industry. Ironically, I know both of you actually hesitated to join the original cage match session because, Ken, I know you didn't really want to be on a blockchain panel, that your company, though it uses blockchain, you're not trying to say that blockchain is the end-all, be-all for everything in music. And Portia, I know you never claimed to be an expert on blockchain, but you had mentioned it on your podcast, The Future of What, and had some skepticism about new solutions that ignore some of the basic human challenges of data in music, how the database itself has to start with humans entering data, and how the data doesn't stay static for long with people moving and changing roles and selling rights and so forth. So I appreciate you doing this twice now.
Glutton for punishment, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Ken, we'll get into your role at your company, or the role that your company plays in a little bit. But would you mind being up for giving us a quick overview of what blockchain in music means, kind of as a jumping off point to get our conversation going?
Sure. I think lots of people have slightly different definitions, but mine would be, as it relates to music, solutions that include, but not necessarily solely rely on, what a fancy word would be distributed ledger technology that's used to, either enhance, disrupt, or enable new ways for consumers, creators, and everyone in the middle to distribute, consume, and create music assets. Broadly, I think there are 3 types or 3 groups, at least from my thinking. You have sort of the direct-to-fan kind of oriented services that are out there that leverage blockchain tech. Streaming services on the chain would be the one to probably highlight there, Pure Tracks, Ujo Music, etc. You have a bunch of people focused on data. That's where we kind of are. Music data, whether that's metadata or rights data. So you have Verifi, that's us, Blocker, Bitfury Surround, Revelator, and others. And then I guess the broader category of other applications to music might include microfinancing of music assets, which is what Vest is focused on, fan engagement, a little bit of digital scarcity, which is Finaply would be an example of that company. And then a lot of stuff going on in ticketing, including companies like Yellowheart and Block Party. Generally sort of solutions that or services that include the chain in this context are probably most useful when there are multiple parties involved that are trying to share something together. And also probably an enterprise approach, if you will, or if you want to think of it in simpler terms, participation by larger companies, because the technology is both nascent and also pretty heavy, meaning, there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen correctly in order for the blockchain to be efficient.
Well, that was an awesome intro, because not only did you paint a big picture, but you also started to hint at what some of the issues have been in the music space already, and I'm looking forward to getting into that. And I have tons of follow-up questions, but before we get there, I also want to just right from the start, Portia, get you right into the conversation. And in the time since we first talked about blockchain and the time of the Music Tectonics Conference, you moved from running the indie label Kill Rock Stars to becoming the president of Music Business Association. And my guess is you've had a lot more conversations about blockchain in recent months. I'm curious, would you talk a little bit about your early hesitations when blockchain became the trendy conversation in the music industry over the last couple of years?
Well, I think the thing about blockchain is that my initial hesitations are still totally my current hesitations. But I would say the best thing about blockchain at the moment is that it is bringing the focus to data, which is where our focus really needs to be, given the place that the music space is at right now with technology. In order for artists, labels, and everyone else to get paid properly, we really need to understand how data is managed and how data is created in the first place. And so it's a very good thing that we're having these conversations. We're actually kind of ahead of the curve as an industry, although a lot of people would say we're behind the curve most of the time, the music industry. There are other industries where they manage, a lot of data and a lot of rights, like the publishing industry, for example, where they just aren't even having these conversations at this time. So, we can feel like a little bit smug because we're at least having the conversation. But yeah, that's, I do feel like it's great that we can bring data into the forefront, and blockchain's a great way to do that.
So if it's great that the blockchain conversation is bringing in this data conversation and putting that at the forefront, what are some of your hesitations, Portia?
Well, the biggest problem that we have is that it doesn't matter what the technology is. The problem is that we are not that great as a group in the simple act of recording who the rights holders are for a given piece of music. Whether your technology is a piece of paper and a pencil, or whether your technology is the blockchain, if you input the data incorrectly in the first place, at least with the pen and paper, you can erase, or the pencil and paper, you can erase and start over again. The blockchain makes it a little bit more difficult if the whole point is that it's not supposed to be able to be changed. But the human error, and not just human error, but also just the lack of understanding of who is a rights holder and how rights holders are going to in the future come into play. Because a lot of the people who are creating music are new artists. And that's not to say that artists who've been around forever don't also completely screw up on, attributing rights. Because some superstar artist, maybe that person, I would assume, is not even, they're not involved in writing down who was playing on what instrument in, a given recording session. But instead they're trusting to their team that someone is doing that properly. And I feel like that is the crux of the matter. It's we are now in a system where all of the payments are coming in these sort of micro bites here and there from a zillion sources. Not that long ago, 20 years ago, we still were an industry where most people got paid from record sales. And I mean, cash across a counter in a record store. And that was the model. That's how people got paid. Now it's a zillion, like I said, a zillion pieces of data coming in from all sorts of different revenue streams. I remember when Spotify came into the marketplace, because I always did royalties for my record label by hand. And, I would be like, I would have a spreadsheet that had like 8,000 lines of data on it, right? And that would be my entire quarter that I needed to process for royalties. And then I remember when Spotify came in and all of a sudden I opened a document, it was like 385,000 lines. And I was like, like, wow. That's so, we're just talking about the volume is out of control. And that's, I don't want to get too far off the point, but I feel like a conversation about recording, like properly recording rights holders at the inception of a piece of music is still very problematic. And whether it's a pencil and paper or whether it's blockchain, that is the conversation we need to get to the forefront and make sure that people understand.
Portia, have you, as you had the initial started to hear about all this kind of hype about blockchain and had sort of I'm a record label, I've done this stuff a certain way for a long time, and I know how hard it is just to get the data, not the data right, but to even to get the inputs correctly. Have you had some conversations that have started to change how you think about blockchain and its possibilities?
I don't think anyone's yet suggested to me that blockchain is going to fix that specific problem. But I feel like I'm being really generous by saying I'm glad that at least it's making people talk about it, because that's what will change things, is that if people understand that this is a topic that's even worth talking about, that's going to make a big difference. I always think about my own career as a recording artist, and like it's 25 years later and I couldn't tell you the name of the studio we recorded in. I don't remember the engineer's last name. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't remember any of that stuff. And if it became important because I was like, let's say in a famous band, which is obviously not the case, someone out there would be not getting paid because I don't have a good memory 25 years later. So I don't see how blockchain technology is going to fix that problem. But I am glad that it's making us have the conversation.
Gotcha. Cool. So Ken, we'll break this down a little bit further. We'll go down to the bottom of the problems, and then we'll build it back up and see where blockchain may first become relevant and useful. But why do you think blockchain became the favorite topic to hate in the music industry?
Yeah. Hate is kind of a strong word. I try not to use it in general. I would say definitely, misinformation and maybe misalignment with some of the broader music business objectives and issues. As Portia pointed out, the conversation around data and getting that right, throughout the life cycle of an asset, I think is, front and center. And I think this kind of holistic, the blockchain solves everything hype, if you will, I think is both misaligned and leads to a lot of misinformation. So I think of it as in a couple different dimensions in terms of how this became what it is. Blockchain and music, chatter, if you will, I feel coincided with what I call the crypto summer, right? Which is cryptocurrencies going crazy. Let's call it circa 3 years ago. So I think for a lot of people, who read the headlines and sort of follow what happened with Bitcoin or any of the other currencies is, two things. One is like these evangelists and startups think, the chain solves everything, and that can't be the case. And they don't even understand our business. So, skepticism from that perspective. And then the second thing, which, is there's no way, is sort of a view that there's no way I'm putting my music's assets on a chain, where some miner controls all my data, right? So I think, those two sort of headline, top of the waves perspectives, I think sort of had something to do with the sort of hate, if you will. I also think it's a very complicated technology. It's also very nascent. What some people call enterprise use cases really have only materialized over the last 18 months or so. I think I mentioned this in our panel discussion. I often look outside of the music industry for what's going on as well. And you can see Walmart, using Fabric, which is a IBM blockchain. Microsoft Xbox is using Azure, which is their own blockchain, to manage publishing rights and royalties for games. And more recently, you take a look at really close to home, Consensus, which is the Ethereum's coding and business solutions group, being selected as one of the technology vendors for the MLC. Those are all really, in my opinion, enterprise use cases, which really didn't exist, for lack of a better term, back in the sort of crypto summer from about 3 years ago. Now, there's a lot of business risk associated with betting on new technologies. So I think there's a little bit of that fearing what you don't understand. And it's very understandable. It's, every industry goes through that when a new piece of tech shows up and they have to evaluate it. The sort of realistic perspective on what's really going on, I think, in the music and blockchain space, if you will, is a vast majority of the efforts in media that involve the chain are not involved in crypto at all. It's not at all either a part or a central part of their services. And so as the hype has gone away, I call it the Game of Thrones style long winter, has gone away on the crypto side. I think, that combined with this emergence of sort of data solutions at the enterprise level, I think have started to dissipate the fear factor, maybe, in embracing the technology as a possible how, not the why or what, but the how of how we're going to deal with some of the issues that the chain might be useful for. I actually, lastly, just to beat myself up for a second, I actually think it's the responsibility of companies like ours who are working in this space to actually demonstrate and provide information as well as education, and ultimately demonstrate the value proposition of why a chain makes sense within various music parts of the music business. I actually don't think we've done a good job of that collectively, and that's on us. And I think we need to do a better job of that.
I wanted to kind of piggyback on that, Dmitri, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, I really want to agree with Ken. I think hate is too strong of a word. I don't.
Sorry, guys.
Oh, no, it's fine.
You're the marketing guy, obviously.
I just think that hate, I think it's not really hate, but I also want to place it in a historical context. We are like, just take me for an example. I ran a record label during the digital revolution, right? So when I started in 2006, it was a purely physical market. And then we moved in, with some iTunes downloads. And then we moved into, the streaming market, and everything became digital. And during the let's give it the 10 years, so that we're back the 3 years that Ken mentioned. That first 10 years, the music industry was inundated with people from the tech sector coming in and saying, I've got this incredible technology that's going to solve all your problems. So when blockchain popped it up, we'd already been inundated, like I said, with these people who had no idea how our sector worked and who were coming in to say, I've got this miracle solution. And the joke I always make on my podcast is, text this number to, me, and you'll get a hat, and I'm always like, I was like, how is that solving any of my problems? Like, that is not a problem that I have in the music industry. You guys are not solving it, but you're very, very confident and sure that your tech is the thing that we're missing because we're a bunch of idiots over here in the music sector. So, we were used to being condescended to by the tech sector for many, many years. And so when blockchain popped up and all of a sudden it was like the hottest thing, and people were investing money in it, it was like, adding insult to injury, because it's like, oh, you guys totally don't understand our sector and you're getting all the money that's out there. So I think that, hate is a strong word, but, I think it was just like, wow, that's really unfair.
So it's more of an eye roll than hate.
Yeah, it was just like, are you serious? How could that be?
And I think just one more thing to add to that. I think, with my sort of travel through the music tech as an investor hat on, putting that hat on for a second, I completely comprehend the sort of reticence of industry knowledgeable industry people looking at the tech industry and also all these startups. There's thousands of them trying to solve a small problem with very little knowledge about the problems that are supposed to be solved, or the way you would go about doing that. And I think for whatever reason, music tech, because I do some stuff outside of the media business as well, tends to attract, if that's even the right term, at least in my experience, more of those sort of evangelist type tech people. And I think, one of the things I hope we're starting to see, certainly around data, at least I see it as, it's actually the industry people that are starting to look at the problem and thinking about creative ways potentially to solve those. So I do think there is kind of a underground shift in the appropriateness of the tools that are being introduced. I certainly see that from my lens, even within this company that I'm currently CEOing.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I've been so blown away in the last 3 years by the kinds of tech companies that are starting up, and that are actually solving real problems. And I feel, I've been doing a lot more of that, focusing on those companies in my podcast, because I really think that we should celebrate the people who took the time, to study the industry, figure out what our problems are, and then figure out tech solutions to those problems. I'm inordinately grateful to those people, because that was something that was a pain point, And I guess it's important to get that clear, because nobody likes to be condescended to. And like you said, Ken, it's weird how music somehow attracted the evangelist types, because as recently as last summer, I was at a conference and someone who was on a blockchain panel, shockingly, said that he had been in the music space, like this was last summer, for a year and a half. And then he was like, wow, you guys, this is a really complicated industry. And I was like, wow. Like, that would literally never occur to me to like walk into an airport and be like, I'm here to, fix all your aviation problems. It's like, what do you know about aviation? Nothing. Step aside, It's just weird.
Yeah, I think partly it's because there have been some other industries where technology has come in and was able to solve some problems, whether they're related to efficiencies or disintermediation or just doing things more efficiently. And in music, it is. I mean, it is pretty complicated when you think about both the recording side and the rights and licensing on that, the composition side and the rights and licensing on that. The every single song basically has multiple inventors, and how you deal with that, and then obviously the shift from physical to digital happened in a way that really wasn't that planned as an industry. It kind of first with piracy, and then with downloads, and then with streaming. It just kind of like it didn't get driven by the folks that were used to making and selling music. And so somebody who comes in a little bit later into the process, maybe in the download or the streaming, the monetized streaming age, is like, wait, how come all these things haven't been connected yet? Because if there's any kind of technology, usually a lot of those connections happen early in the process. If you're doing e-commerce for the first time, you're figuring out all those systems. So I think that might be part of it too. But let's talk about Ken. In your opening answer to my first question about what is blockchain, you made reference to a lot of different things, and I'm curious. Could we talk a little bit more specifically about where you both think blockchain will become relevant and useful in its earliest stages in the music industry? You mentioned something about enterprise approaches and implementations of blockchain, and the idea that you need a lot of different players that are using it. You can't just be one entity that says, here's the blockchain and here's how it works in music, because if it doesn't interact with anything else. What are the early use cases that you guys could see really being implemented successfully?
So I'll give you a slightly self-serving answer because of what we're doing, which I think, we've touched on a bunch of the aspects of it already. So we're in the rights data management space, if you will, space in quotes. And we're essentially a consistent data framework to connect the entire value chain of recorded music, from artist to writer, all the middlemen, label, publisher, PRO, distributors, all the way over to the streaming services, and of course the fans on the other side. The two goals, if you want to think about it, are sharing that data in an effective and efficient way across all parties. You can unpack that, and there's a lot that needs to happen there to make it work right. And also making sure that changes over time, which is what Portia pointed out before, are actually recorded in a way that's useful throughout the asset's lifetime and artist's lifetime, for that matter. So it's a pretty lofty goal in terms of where we are at. I'll get into some of the clients we're working with and why I think this makes sense. Our approach might make sense. But essentially, rights data and music data more broadly is actually a perfect use case for blockchain, an underpinning of blockchain. What the chain effectively does, from my perspective, is it provides an egalitarian way to share data and track changes. So everything else that's very specific to music rights, like we talked about, 2 parties, 6 different rights in the US, infinite ways to monetize, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff needs to be thought through with music industry specialists, not blockchain specialists. But the chain is actually really good at communicating changes and acting as the clerk of the court as it relates to data. So, I actually think this actually is one of the most useful and frankly foundational things that make sense to do. I again reemphasize, the chain doesn't solve everything, so we got to get rid of that myth, right? And the idea that somehow we're displacing the industry because we have technology coming in, right, disrupting everything, I also think that's a myth. And I think those are the 2 main reasons why maybe sort of technology optimism didn't meet actually market demand, right? As I said earlier, the blockchain is how, or part of how, you would actually get something done, not the why or what of what you're trying to solve for.
So you talked about rights management and managing data in general. I mean, there were past attempts to create global databases of rights. There were sometimes I guess you could call them independent companies, entities trying to do it. And then there were also some that weren't so independent, PROs teaming up, or other entities that, other parties in the ecosystem did not think was going to be neutral enough to justify kind of buying into it. One question that comes up is, you're running a company, so obviously there's some profit motive involved. So people will instantly wonder, well, how do we protect that neutrality of data that the blockchain technology is meant to provide if, you have some interests of your own? Maybe just leave it with that. How do you respond to that?
I think it's a great point. Where we are today as our company is still nascent. So we don't have a fully distributed, if you will, multi-tenant, blockchain community of data owners, or node runners, as some people would call it, at all yet. That's for sure. I think you take an incrementalist approach to that. Our philosophy as a company is it's everyone else's data that we want to be great caretakers for. We're not trying to become another monopoly. We do need critical mass of players to get involved. We currently have 7 clients, including a major label, major publisher, a major PRO, and a global streaming service, as well as a distributor, which is Fuga. I can name them. Involved in actually working on essentially creating that, maybe the beginnings of, right, a microcosm of the recorded music horizontal, all the different verticals. And but at this point in time, we're actually literally just running, a singular data set. I think the true benefit of having an egalitarian data set happens when you have a distributed ledger that everyone's agreed to. I don't think we should be the ones dictating that, which is why we've always taken a client-first approach. Early days, I'd like to think that in 2 years-ish time, we'll have a community of large as well as representatives for the independent artists involved in the data community, and we'll make those decisions together in terms of how we create the distribution. But, out of fairness today, we are, quote, just another database, if you want to be blunt about it. But with the spirit of, having this technology work for the broader community for their benefit. Two other things, because you mentioned it. Yes, we are a for-profit company, small startup. We haven't made a profit yet, but we'll hopefully get there soon. And the other point is, yes, other things have failed, and we very much recognize that. I think it's a very, very difficult, trick to try to get all of everyone involved, right, in order to make this work. I think that's a little bit of a too high a bar, if you will. So we have a very different approach towards building this, which is we don't think we need everybody. We do need to have enough of the larger organizations playing nicely with each other around sharing data. And that's been our approach. And I think we're getting there. It's taken a while, but we are getting there. The mindset has shifted on many of these organizations in terms of what makes rights data move more quickly so that everybody in the value chain can get paid properly and efficiently.
Portia, where do you think Verifi, Ken's company, might get hung up in this process?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't really want to comment on Ken's company. I'm sure Ken's company is awesome.
Rip me.
No, I'm sure it's the best.
Thank you.
At what they do. But I don't feel qualified to comment on Ken's company at all.
Okay, that's fine. So maybe I'll ask this question. What do you guys think needs to happen across society for the dream of blockchain to become more implementable in music? What needs to happen in a bigger picture? Because in a way it feels like, Ken, you've talked about this as a nascent company and a nascent application of blockchain. So what's missing? What needs to keep happening in on the broader societal interactions and expectations and values and processes that would make this stuff work?
Well, I have thoughts on that. I don't know answers, but if someone were to come up with a super simple interface, something really easy, like a Spotify type thing, like Instagram, for example, something that's so easy that it's on every kid's phone. And then when kids make new music, they can just put their information in to that simple interface, right? It also has to be cool. It has to be something that kids want to use. So, I mean, this is like a really tall order. This is total. I'm just really throwing this out here. And it has to be, interesting. It might have to have like a social component, to get kids to want to do it. I think that's the only way that we're going to, I think that's one of the ways that would be easier to get young people to understand how to, get their credits in there right at the very beginning. I think for older artists, for more established artists, they become surrounded by a team of people who definitely get it, that recording stuff like that is important and at the source. But, something that made it easy, because we're just seeing, what is it, 40,000 new songs uploaded to Spotify every day, something like that. If we're in that, if that's where we are, and I think Ken really put it nicely when he said that, the industry didn't really see this digital revolution coming. Like, we didn't prepare for this. We didn't, the problems that we have are problems that just came up, as opposed to, us having a great idea about like, oh, this is how it's going to unfold, and we're going to need this kind of solution. We're playing catch up to some extent, and as a result, I feel like, what has happened, I'm sure it happens in every time technology changes, but the flaws in the system have been highlighted by this new technology, the changes in technology. So, if blockchain is a tool that is underpinning some kind of cool new interface that makes it fun and cool for kids to record their credits when they write a song, then that, I think, would change things in a big way. And I know that that's kind of bananas.
Well, longtime Music Tectonics listeners will have heard Viva Sound and their Studio Collect app or plugin on the show before. Not sure whether they're listening, but if they are, maybe they'll make it more Instagrammable looking as well. But yeah, it's interesting because throughout this conversation, you keep going back to the point of creation is the moment where you think it's the most challenging to capture this information. Ken, do you want to respond to that idea?
Yeah, by the way, this sort of notion of making it easy for creators to manage their rights and data, it's not very sexy, but it's super important, as we all know. And so we actually have various projects in mind, including a couple of negotiations we're making on ensuring that we don't end up just being an enterprise solution, if you will. So getting to the individual artists and the creator community, both on the songwriter side and also on the recorded music side, and making it easy and simple and fun and accessible and actually connected to things that matter to them, even though they may not know it, I think is the trick, right? So, it's got to be easy for you to load up your information when you're doing your co-write session in a studio. Boom, that data's there, but it also needs to go places, right? It needs to make sure it gets to, if you ever sell your music or you do a deal around pub or whatever. So I think there's sort of that migration over time aspect. And then, I think our view as it relates to the sort of creator's life, if you will, is it's going to continue to, we've made these amazing creative tools and we've very much focused on the actual creation. And I think there'll continue to be innovations around there. But, the hope I think that many of us has is that it's in a seamless way, the data stuff starts to show up in that creative process. So, for example, we're speaking to a number of the DAW manufacturers about embedding what we do, which is not only capture the data at the point of a recording session or whatever, but also allow the mechanism for the data to be collected asynchronously or over time, right? Because not everyone might have been there, or you might do a second session where there's a different group of people involved, et cetera, et cetera. So this idea of building truth over time so that when you go to commercialize or monetize the music asset, you've got enough data or better data and a mechanism that continues to improve that data, I think is, fundamentally behind the mission of what we're trying to do, actually. So I think Portia's nailed it on that one.
Awesome. So let's broaden it out. Since it's clear both of you are trying to make the music industry more successful across the board, where do you see glimmers of hope and creativity in the music business these days, regardless of whether this is a blockchain topic or not? What are the things that are getting you excited these days?
Well, can I name some companies by name?
It's fine with me.
Okay. There's a bunch that I've been really excited about. There's a company called Super Hi-Fi that is envisioning what's next for streaming services. And I love their idea, which is that, basically right now, all the streaming services are the same. You can get the same stuff and it's just a matter of the interface. But what if they made the way they deliver that streaming content sound different, like sound branded? So when you were listening to something, you actually knew you were listening to Spotify because of the way it was presented. And I thought that was genius. I just thought that was fascinating. And they have an AI that powers that.
Did you see them at AI's Got Talent, the talent show we had at Music Tectonics?
I saw them. I saw them there. I don't think I saw the demo there, but
they participated in our AI's Got Talent show, and theirs was a little different than the others because a lot of them were about how AI is being used to create music, but theirs was more about how AI is being used to create the DJ human-like experience of segue from track to track or from music track to audio track and that sort of thing. So that was a fun thing that emerged at the conference. What else you got?
Yeah, they were. I like it because they're thinking about what's next for streaming, and I feel like we haven't really done that, and that's a great thought because that is true. It has to happen, right? At some point, streaming has to sort of change. It's not just going to be the what it is now forever. So I like that. It's very forward thinking.
I mean, when and it's interesting to hear you say that, Portia, from your position and your role in the field as well, because when Spotify started buying up podcast related companies, whether they were tools or actual publishers of podcasts, I think a lot of people in the music industry got concerned that they were basically using that to leverage on price for access to using music for streaming. But what I'm starting to see emerge from my perspective is that Spotify is no longer thinking about competing with other streaming services. They're thinking about competing with radio, the entire concept of radio, by mixing music with other spoken word and audio. And obviously there's news now, I think, that they're looking at The Ringer as another acquisition, which, it makes me think of when SoundCloud said they're going to be the YouTube of audio, which sounded cool and was cool for a while, but the business model didn't quite go in that direction. It does make you think, oh, wait a second, audio has been like playing second fiddle to video lately, but there's still so much possible experiences with audio, just music being one piece of that as well. So it's an interesting kind of move that you're kind of referring to with that super hi-fi example.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting to just think about that whole potential future. There's another company called Tracklib out of Sweden that is doing incredible stuff with licensing for sample licensing, and then also creating the technology to do the sampling. And what I think is really exciting about that is I spoke earlier about the zillion and one income streams that we now have for artists. But one of the coolest things about sampling these days is that sampling can bring back the career of an artist who was previously, maybe lost in the mists of history or whatever, or deceased, and people just don't remember their music as well. I think sampling technology is one of those incredibly cool things. And we're seeing, I know we're seeing that on TikTok as well. Like, I really love how a lot of the technology today is bringing back the careers of older artists to a new generation to appreciate them all over again. So I think that's really fun.
We will be listening to ABBA for hundreds of years to come.
And that's not a bad thing.
Not a bad
just
thing.
For the record.
Cool. Were there more, Portia, or should we ask Ken for something from his Glimmers of Hope category?
Well, I think the company Jamber is really exciting too, if you guys are familiar with them.
Oh, yeah.
What they do is just great in terms of getting artists connected to, and sort of, I love it when technology educates people by the way. It's like, oh, we're doing this thing for you, but, we're also teaching you something by the way. And I love it because artists do need to understand where their money comes from and how. And so, to be paying people and also giving them a little sly education is pretty rad.
Awesome. Ken, you want to throw in the mix anything from your hope and creativity category?
Maybe not specific companies, but, the idea of a more democratized toolkit, which is what Jamber would be an example of, and some of the other companies. I think it's nice to see a decade into being a music tech person, solid services actually now available. And I think, that underpins, right? I mean, you're asking every artist to be a small business person. And I think it's a lot of, it's very distracting if you get caught up in the skunk works, if you will. And I do feel like that's something that is, let's say, over the next decade going to be both available, affordable, and I think to Portia's point, educates the sort of creator community broadly, on what's necessary. There's another company called Cosign, which I think is also doing similar things that I'm very excited about. But away from sort of the sort of underpinnings of a more democratized toolkit to make all this work more efficiently, I'll just point out it's an amazing time to be a creator, actually. You can instant free distribution if you want from your bedroom, tools to collaborate globally across artists, multimedia related stuff, amazing great sounds being able to be produced for very little money. I think it's actually wonderful. And as a consumer, the celestial jukebox is real. It's going to get better. It's going to get, augmented over time. It's inexpensive or free, depending on what you decide to do. It's amazing. So, I think because the music industry and the music business is about monetizing these assets and getting paid for it, that's hard, right? It's gotten harder. So there are some worries there. You can go down a deep rabbit hole there around artist sustainability and all that. But, reality is it's micro pennies per stream. I think that's the reality of where we are. And I think things that help ultimately sustain creators' careers in the monetization box, I think is actually the problem that hopefully many of us are involved in solving together, because that's what's going to make a much more robust creator economy. You can't get worried about the tail, if you will, because you can't get paid. Another big one for me that I see as an opportunity, you're starting to see very large companies like Hypnosis do this. There's outside money that's now investing in music. I think that's a fantastic thing, and we're just scratching the surface. We have the traditional music industry way of financing artist careers and music assets with advances, et cetera. You're now seeing definitely sort of the morphing of that, in my opinion, happen. I think that's great. You're diversifying risk capital. I've done some in artist and songwriter direct investment in sort of my portfolio of work. I think those things, they might be small right now. It's very difficult to do these things well, especially when the data ain't great. But as the data gets better, I think you're going to see, some hopeful capital, if you will, and alternatives to actually financing artists and careers and music assets that have been, out of the market, if you will, outside of music publishing for a long time now. And I do feel that now that everything's an evergreen annuity, if we can get that thought understood by the people who are looking for returns, I think you can turbocharge, or if you will, change the requirements behind sustainability for artists. So I know that's very abstract, but that, for me, I look at that as actually as a huge plus sign in where we are today.
I agree, Ken, completely. I think that is one of the most exciting things. I've thought about that a lot recently, especially, because for years it was like indies versus major labels, like that was always sort of the narrative. And it doesn't really have to be that way anymore. If you have investors, if you have people behind your company, or even just behind your artist,
Yeah.
it can be, it does sort of democratize the playing field. So that's pretty awesome.
It's a very different way of talking than people who are talking about cryptocurrency. So you definitely have demonstrated where the blockchain conversation is now versus when it was a few years ago. I mean, all those larger pattern things around democratization of both creation and monetization, obviously, and all the things, Portia, you talked about as well, both some big picture about where the music industry is going and how innovators are building stuff that actually does help is super, super awesome. Thank you both for being so peaceful in this conversation. It's like
you didn't hand out any boxing gloves, Dmitri. I was like, waiting for that. What happened? Or wrestling masks, Mexican wrestling masks.
Yeah, you wore one. That was cool. No, I'm glad to be a part of documenting this evolution of conversation, and also modeling a different approach to having the conversation. So, hey, Portia, before we begin our wrap up, can you tell our listeners about the Music Biz Conference that the Music Business Association, which you're the president of, is hosting in May in Nashville? I know in the past you've had a startup summit, you've had a metadata summit. What can the music innovation world, the music tectonics community, expect out of the conference in 2020?
Oh yeah, Music Biz 2020 will be in Nashville from May 11th through the 14th at the JW Marriott, and it's going to be amazing. There's going to be great crowdsourced programming so that we source from our members, our panels. We're also doing a community hub this year where we're going to have roundtables and speed dating one-on-ones. It's going to be really great, and you should all come out. You should go to musicbiz.org to find out more.
I will be there.
Awesome. Well, good. Next week, we're going to have huge news about our 2020 Music Tectonics Conference. If you want to be the first to find out our 2020 dates and venue, go to musictectonics.com right now and sign up for our newsletter. That's where we always put exclusive news first. And if you're not subscribed to this podcast, please subscribe now so you can also keep up to date with our future programming announcements. Ken and Portia, thanks so much for joining us on the Blockchain Peace Summit and on the Music Tectonics podcast.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it. Talking to both of you. We'll do it again, hopefully soon.
Thanks, you guys. That was great talking to both of you as well.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.